May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be always acceptable to you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot." This is a challenging passage of Scripture for several reasons, not the least of which that it stretches, if not defies, logic. Salt is always salty. Now, this issue came up the other day in Bible study. One of the participants had a study Bible that had notes and comments in the bottom half of each page. And for this passage, it suggested a science experiment to wet salt on the plate, to let it dry and then taste it and see that it's lost its taste. Now, I'll admit I was a bit caught out when he mentioned this because, quite frankly, it didn't make any sense to me. One of the major sources of salt in the world is drying seawater. If salt lost its taste when it got wet, then how could we get salt from seawater? It just didn't make sense. Now, when I saw this come up in today's gospel reading, I decided to take a bit of a deeper dive to see if it was true. I spent far more time reading about salt and salt mining, processing, and the history of salt than I ever thought was possible. Now, to make a long story short, no, salt cannot lose its saltiness from being wet, nor any other process short of chemically breaking it down. Now, if that's the case, then what could Jesus be talking about? Is he giving some sort of chemistry class? Doubtful. Was he mistaken? Hardly. Are we just misunderstanding something? Most likely. So what about this Bible study science experiment, though? Were the authors of that incorrect about wet salt losing its taste? No, I suppose I should add a qualifier to my statement that salt cannot lose its saltiness. Pure salt cannot lose its saltiness. Salt with additives, like modern iodized table salt, can. Now, maybe this fact is the key to understanding the point that Jesus was making. Maybe this was a teaching against the dangers of syncretism. Now, I know that's a $5 word that I had never heard until I went to seminary, so let me explain it. Syncretism is the practice of taking bits and pieces of other people's and cultural practices and adding them onto your own. It's a bit like the idea of the cultural melting pot of America, but syncretism is specific to religious practices and thoughts. It's not just a matter of eating Mexican or Chinese food, but of replacing parts of your own culture and religion with someone else's. To give an example, it would be like us holding a sweat lodge instead of confirmation classes, or instead of wearing Christian vestments if I wore a Shaolin monk's robe. Now, it does run a bit counter to the modern idea of blending practices, but it really does have its seat in the idea of compromising values and abandoning or giving up what is essential to your own identity. Now, as you can imagine, at the time of Jesus, with so many cultures coming into contact with each other, Roman, Greek, Hebrew, Syrian, Moabite, the list goes on, it created a lot of situations where such borrowing or syncretism could occur. In fact, one of the reasons that the Old Testament warns about taking foreign wives is just to avoid such a problem. And it's one of the things that ended up undermining King Solomon's reign. So Jesus says something else that makes me think that this is what he's talking about. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. If Jesus is talking about syncretism and not chemical and culinary property of salt, then what he is actually saying here is that if a person or a people has lost their identity, what makes them unique? Well, then they have changed, and they are no longer what they once were. Now, in this case, if Israel, the chosen people, have given up what makes them unique, then they have lost the favor of God. And if that has happened, how can they be God's people in the world? Now, if that happens, as Jesus says, it's no longer good for anything, but it's thrown out and trampled underfoot. Now, the same warning extends to the Christian church. If we give up what makes us Christian and take on things from other cultures, even if it's just secular culture, we begin to lose our identity. But how do we know what that identity is? How can we know when we need to hold on to things and when it's time to change things? What aspects of our identity are vital and can't be changed? Now, last week, I spoke about expectations, and now we come to the related idea of potential. If we can understand our potential, the church's potential, then we can start to know what can and cannot be changed. However, it's something that is hard to see from the inside, or rather, it's easier to see someone else's potential than it is to see our own. Unfortunately, this usually takes the form of a negative. Someone makes a life-changing mistake, and we say, they never lived up to their potential. Or taken to the extreme, they die young, and we say, they had so much potential. But we come back to the same problem. Who recognizes their own potential unless it's pointed out to them by others? Now, in my own life, I know that I see my girls' potential in all aspects of their life far better than they do. And I was told on several occasions during my discernment process some variation of, oh, I wonder when you figure that out. Other people notice our potential far before we do. But either they don't share this insight with us, or we cannot hear it when it is shared. So this is the challenge to all of us, isn't it? When you see someone's potential for something, tell them. When someone points out your potential, hear them. I'm not saying anything new here. Again, from the gospel, no one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Accept that you have light in you and let it shine. Don't think yourself beyond this, of too little potential, too little ability, too little light. Only the faith of a mustard seed is needed to do great things. Abraham and Sarah were too old to have kids. Noah liked his wine too much. Moses had a speech impediment. Samuel was just a child. David, just a shepherd. Peter and John were uneducated. Paul had a thorn in his side. Matthew was a sinful tax collector. You can take Jesus. He came from a backwater town, was born under the cloud of suspicion of infidelity, and was executed in the most humiliating manner available at the time. And maybe most humbling of all, took on humanity to carry out God's will. Though each had a calling that was unique and different from the others, they all had the potential to be something far greater than was apparent. Likewise, our potential is not something to be compared with others. Each of us is given unique gifts and opportunities. Each of us, in part of a community, has its own unique potential to live up to. We need to engage with each other, to discern what that potential is, and to grow to fulfill it. A candle, the headlights of a car, and a glow stick. They all shed light differently, but they still hold back the darkness. One is not less because it is not the other. God's expectation for us is set out in Micah 6. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. The promise of our potential was set out today in Isaiah. If you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom will be like the noonday. If we hold true to our identities as Christians, if we meet God's expectations, if we look for potential in each other and help in reaching it, then we will truly be what Jesus called us to be, the light of the world. So I leave you with this admonition, to look inwardly and find what makes salt salty within yourself. Find it and hold on to it. Find it in yourself and then find it in someone else. Uncover all the baskets that hide the light, and heap them up on a lampstand for all to see. To God be all the glory, now and forever.